Well, good evening, everybody. We're excited about everybody being here. I think I see Councilmember Baines walking in the door, and our distinguished council member, who is also the chairman of our Outreach and Oversight Committee. So without any further ado, come on up. Let me introduce Councilmember District 3, Oliver Baines.
All right. Well, I promise to be brief. I know we have a special guest here, and it's much more important to hear from him than from me, but I do want to offer just a brief welcome. It is, as always, good to see you all. This has been a long, arduous process, and we are right in the thick of it. We have made incredible strides. Tonight, we're going to be here to talk about some of the challenges that we have, too. We have certainly want to make sure that we get input from our partners at the Strategic Growth Council. So I wanted to take a moment and just make sure that most of the people, as I look around the room, most of you in here have a project, I think. So this information, this meeting should be very, very important to you. I know that we have a lot of interested community members as well that may not have projects, but are still very interested. So as we move forward, we have a couple more hurdles we have to clear before we're home free. We're really close to getting a contract signed with our friends at the SGC on the city side, and we're looking forward to making sure we get that nailed down. Important questions tonight, though. I'm glad you all came. Make sure that we are listening. Make sure that we are engaged, as we always are. And the good thing is we have the person that has answers for us here tonight. So with that, am I welcoming Randall up right now? And I get the honor of welcoming up a person who has become a friend, I like to say, over the last couple of years, Randall Winston, who is the executive director of the Strategic Growth Council, SGC, administering the first ever TCC program in the state of California. So I don't envy your job at all, Randall. It's very, very tough work. I always want to remind people that what the state is doing has never been done before. In many ways, you all hear me say what we did was never done before, but it's also true for the state. So in many ways, we are all moving through this process together. We're all learning together. It's tough, but we're making it happen. And Randall has done a fantastic job being the man at the helm, having to help make some of the toughest decisions that the state's ever had to make when it comes to a fund like this and a brand new program. So anyway, my friend, without any further ado, let me welcome up Executive Director of Strategic Growth Council, Randall Winston.
Thank you so much, Councilmember, and good evening, everyone. It really is a pleasure to be here. Again, I think I've recognized just about everyone in this audience, and we are indeed in the thick of it. So I want to do a few things, and we'll definitely leave some time for questions. Number one, take a little kind of a quick overview of sort of TCC past, present, future, some of the issues that are on the table right now with regard to finalizing the grant agreement here for the TCC effort in Fresno, and then the grant agreement timeline itself. The councilmember made a point that I want to reemphasize, and it's really key. These are incredibly complex projects or sets of projects. This is the first time that the state is undertaking a contracting arrangement of this sort at this scale, and it's not just Fresno. It's Watts down in Los Angeles, and it's Ontario down in the Inland Empire in Southern California. Each of those complex grant agreements has a host of partners, a host of challenges once you sort of start digging through the specific projects themselves, and legal language that we need to work through in terms of the ultimate contract that we'll sign. And all those agreements have to be sort of looked at side by side so that before we release any of the funds, we are sure about the performance metrics, accountability, the different criteria that we are going to use to hold each of our grantees accountable to ensure that those funds are spent appropriately. So all of that we are working through right now, and a lot of it is internal. So in terms of timing, if anyone can apologize or should apologize, it's us. It has taken a long time. We've hired actually a couple new people since then, about to bring on a new legal counsel, a new senior administrative individual who can help to administer these processes, and then also an additional technical assistance provider, and probably multiple who will be on the ground partnering here with SGC and you all. So a lot is in the works, but let me take a quick step back. Timeline, again, I think most of you are aware of this. It was 2016 in the fall that we signed legislation, AB 2722, that set up the Transformative Climate Communities program. We spent about a year or so developing guidelines. We had those guidelines go out the door at the end of the summer of 2017. The intense and I think intense and maybe times contentious process underway here in Fresno. I was obviously here for a number of those meetings, resulted in the package that I think a really incredible process that our council certainly lauded and I think resonated throughout others in Sacramento, that resulted in you all winning. And that was earlier this year, now back in January. And since then, when it went to the council, there was a couple of things that SGC and our council members wanted to see worked out a little bit further. That was the community engagement plan and process here in Fresno, the anti-displacement plan, again, here in Fresno. And that bundled up into the broader agreement, again, that we're working through now. So all of those still remain on the table. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the grant agreement timeline, then I'll return to those elements. So I mentioned sort of some of the reasons as to why the agreement is taking so long to work through. We do hope to arrive at a final agreement in July, hopefully first or second week of July with the city. And again, this is coming from SGC's perspective and making sure that the language in that agreement, as I mentioned earlier, aligns with not just our sort of program guidelines and goals, but also what is happening in other parts of the state. And shortly thereafter, we'll lay out the process for further refining, again, that community engagement plan and the anti-displacement plan. And then from there, hopefully, sooner rather than later, proceed with implementation. Now, one of the reasons why this agreement is taking so long, and this is going to be another part of the process here as we dig down into each of the projects, is that in order to pay every project, we're going to need to define, and are in the process of defining, scopes of work for every single project and stages at which we're going to provide funding for each of those scopes of work in a way, again, that meets our guidelines, that's accountable, and can be tracked through the life of that project, or really those projects, because it's plural. So that's what's taking one of the things that's taking such a long time to work through. So appreciate your patience on that. I referenced technical assistance providers. So here in Fresno, we're actually looking at sort of two different types of technical assistance providers. So if folks remember from the statute, the law, AB 2722, it actually requires SGC to provide technical assistance at every stage of the transformative climate community process, including through implementation. So it means that we are responsible for setting up the criteria and scope of work for that technical assistance provider, that entity that will be on the ground helping to implement each of those projects. So that is in the process of being determined, and we hope to have that entity on board by the time that grant agreement is signed. So July timeframe, maybe August, depending upon how long it takes for us to bring them on board. We're also looking at potentially other technical assistance providers who can help to kind of, like we're doing here, shepherd along the community engagement process. Look, we know there are a lot of projects. A lot of those projects are, in various stages of being worked through, and even though they're just sort of maybe pieces of a piece of a project, we understand that the entire TCC package of proposals is really part of a larger effort or set of efforts. And so the more that we can leverage other technical assistance providers to assist each of you, and especially the partners, in building out those projects beyond even what's available through TCC funding, we want to try to do that. So part of our challenge as well here has been, what's the appropriate kind of ecosystem of folks that we're going to bring on board, you all who have projects, those who are, don't find the community engagement process to be exactly what it should be, and the tweaks that need to be made. We're working to set up that ecosystem now. So we're excited. I know it's been a while, and appreciate your patience. I'm going to stop there and open it up to questions. And I know that we've got recording here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk towards you and just give you the microphone, and then we'll go from there so everyone can hear you. And just keep it to a question, that'd be great. If I can answer. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Diane Smith, and the question that I have is, after talking to several people whose projects were supposedly improved in what was voted on, they're saying that they're no longer in the running for any money. So how is that happening?
So I can say that we have made no decisions, zero decisions with regard to the change of the proposal. We haven't signed a grant agreement. As far as I know, we are, still, there's a process. So I mentioned we're going through working out the grant agreement. With each of the projects, the eligible projects, we are going through and determine what are eligible fundable components and what might not be in terms of readiness. Well, we have not finished that process yet.
Part of that question was that they were told to go to someone else because the projects were currently similar, and the other group, which is a larger group, is not willing to accommodate that particular group, so it's like they're just shut out. And so those are the kind of things that apparently is happening, and somebody needs to do something about it, because
Okay.
they're passed, when they voted in there, and they're saying you have to have so many years into it, running a program that you got to go into somebody else. Well, the somebody else's are pushing other people aside. So they're not trying to move them into their project.
Okay, and that's important to hear. That is definitely not familiar on my plate. We're looking at the projects that have been submitted. Okay, do you want to ask a question as well, please? Yeah.
Thank you. Kathy Omachi from Fresno Chinatown. Where would we get the staffing layout as you are currently structured, and the salaries for all of the positions that are being hired to do the TCC program, and how much money has actually been paid out on staffing and other support things that still haven't come to the community?
Very good question. So in terms of that, TCC, I should have mentioned this earlier on, $140 million total across 3 communities. Insofar as money leaving SGC, it has been $0. Nothing. Because we will not be awarding any funds until we finalize the grant agreement. Our own staff, however, we definitely have staff who've built this program. So we currently have, and all of it's, I can give you a link because all of it's public record. Some of it goes to it's across 5 different employees at SGC. We did pay for technical assistance throughout the process. So we had a technical assistance provider during the application process, and the application process, if you recall, actually had 2 phases, a concept phase and then a full application phase. So that we did have technical assistance provider come on, but I can definitely give the information for all the employees. Insofar as though for any of the grantees, Watts, Ontario, Fresno, there has not been any money dispersed, and there will not be any money dispersed until we finalize the grant agreement.
The question I have is, what is being expended on the state above all of us? Okay.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Part of the question was so much of what's being expended for all of you to do this work on the state side for almost a year, and that was the question.
Okay. So 5% of is the administrative costs of this program, and it's the cost across every grant program. It's a common for state grant funding. Oh, correct. That is correct. Yes, 7 million. Go ahead.
Matthew Gillian, is that 5% grant administration fee, is that kind of across the board for the project leads that may be administering this grant as well? So you guys take a 5%, then leads 5% and keeps trickling down?
A very good question, and this is one that has caused, as you might imagine, some consternation across all of our grantees. We're in each location, we're working with lead applicants to figure out how best to distribute those costs is the honest answer. So it is not the short answer to your question is it hasn't been determined yet, but in Watts, in Ontario, and here's in Fresno, it is the same situation where that $7 million is off the top of each of the awards proportionally. And that is definitely on us, on SGC. Lisa, but wait till I get you the mic, yeah.
Typically, when you have a grant and you take off 5% off the top for administration by the state, then you have the grantees and you have administration to the grantees, both the city and the actual programs. What is the percentage breakdown of their administrative cost? How is it going to break down? Is the city going to take 50% and the grantees that are actually running the program going to take 50%? Do you have a formula?
We do not have a formula as of yet. This is going to be, I think, a city question, but also, frankly, something that I'll be better prepared to answer once we have the agreement finalized in the next few weeks here. So we don't know. There's no formula yet. We're talking with each of our lead applicants to determine what is the sort of the most appropriate way and fairest way to go about it. Look, this is I will say that this is very much on SGC's shoulders. You know, we had the $140 million, that number went out, $70 million for Fresno went out, and I don't think we did the best of job communicating that there would be an administrative set of costs. Absolutely. I mean, seriously, yes. So, wait. So folks can hear. Sorry. Yeah, I'm going to give you the mic.
5%
Yeah.
for the city.
Go ahead.
My suggestion is, since the city is only overseeing and administrating, they should only get 25% of the 5%, whereas the actual people that are, boots on the ground should get 75% of that allocation.
Okay, thank you for the suggestion. And I will say that just to add to that, so this is very complex, as I've said multiple times. That administration in statute is over 5 years. So there are 5 years worth of folks administering projects from the state side and from your side as well. There's also one more element that I wanted to mention here that SGC is paid for. This kind of gets to your question about what we're paying for, and I'm sorry for leaving it out. We wanted to make sure up front that we were bringing in another third party to be able to assess the work that is underway in all communities. From the standpoint of being critical, being able to provide lessons learned for future processes, future awards. So we are working with UCLA and UC Berkeley, who will be undertaking an assessment across every community. This is apart from SGC. They're building what's called logic models. They'll be doing surveys. They'll be assessing outcomes. And again, this is for the purpose of improving this program in the future. So that is another expense that we committed to up front. Let's make sure anyone new. Yeah, let me get someone new real fast, and I'll go. Oh, I'm so sorry. I will come right back to you. Yeah, sorry. I will come right back.
Paul Hill. You mentioned that SCG will determine the stages in which different projects will be reimbursed or funded. How are those stages determined? Is it based on the task that we included within our budgets or our plans, or how are you determining at what point?
That's a good question. So This is actually a somewhat easy question to answer. Our goal was to be able to get out the money once the grant agreement was signed as quickly as possible. We cannot, as a state agency, however, provide advance payments. So that means we can't say we're going to give you money and we'll trust that you will do the work. We have to be able to outline a scope of work and make payments based upon that scope. The short answer to your question is that we would like to pay people as fast as possible. So we're looking at a time frame of 1 to 2 months. The work itself will be divided up in different ways. The important thing from our perspective is the time. We understand that many organizations can't just float cash to do the work without having the cash to undertake the work. And so as fast as possible, likely on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, and the scopes of work can be divided in any fashion. From our perspective, we just want to get it out as soon as we can in a way that is accountable, that once we're audited, because we probably will be, we can say how it's spent, it was spent well, and if it's not, then we won't make the payment. Does that answer your question? Yeah, Paul? Thank you. Sorry.
Hi, Eileen Reed, West Fresno resident. My question is this. In the assessment that you just outlined that you're bringing in UCLA and UC Berkeley, don't you think it would be better to have some local people who are actually attached to these communities to be a part of this assessment? I can't speak for Watts or Ontario, but I do know that those of us sitting in this room know Southwest Fresno best. If it wasn't for the Southwest Fresno, Fresno wouldn't even be getting this money. And I really think that a lot of us have been shut out of this process, and many of us have been saying this to you and your staff since the beginning, that nobody is listening to the smaller voices from Southwest Fresno about what's needed to be funded and how changes need to be made. So now that the money has been allocated, even if not paid out, I think that somebody from our community needs to be part of that assessment process for future, because this money is already spent for right now.
So yes, there still is the ability actually for individuals here to be able to be part of an assessment, and we would like actually both. I will maintain that there is absolute value in having both, an individual or a party who actually is looking at it from outside of Fresno and just across all the jurisdictions, recognizing that there are differences. But this is a statewide program. Fresno's obviously a critical piece of it, but it's statewide and it will need to continue to be statewide. That being said, I mentioned that we're going to have technical assistance individuals on the ground. And so there is absolutely the possibility, and I think you make a good point, to build in the ability for that entity who has not been selected yet to undertake an assessment. And maybe I think that person would need to be from the community. So that's a very good suggestion. But I do think, though, that we need to have both, just because it's a statewide program. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very, very fair point. I get Gary, and then we'll just hand it back. How you doing?
Hey, Gary Hunt, longtime resident. Randall, I have a question. I think we spoke before about this. So in the future tense, there's probably going to be other grant funding programs, correct? So since this is a pilot model, what kind of algorithms have you created or there should be an algorithm set up to further study what's going on, because there's too many voices, too much confusion, and I think that once you have the proper algorithms in place, it will give a more outlined and detailed perspective of what's going on.
I think that's a really good question. So I do think in this first round, we've learned a good amount, made mistakes, learned from mistakes with regard to the community engagement process and how to structure that, how pitfalls, ways to do it well, maybe not so well. So I do think the criteria that we have outlined for the formation of the collaborative stakeholder structure is one that we have certainly learned from. I didn't mention this earlier on, and I should have. We actually early last week, went out with a new set of guidelines, updated guidelines for this program, which does outline, it's a new funding round. It clearly makes some changes based upon what we've learned. I think we've learned in this first year. Now, we expect to have future rounds. There's budget discussions actually happening as we speak with regard to how much money will be in future rounds. But, all of SGC's programs, we have a housing program, we have a conservation program, we have a technical assistance program, are kind of iterative insofar as we will continue to learn from them. They evolve. We don't expect to get everything right the first time, but we do hope to improve and get better. And I think TCC is being kind of our, I would say, kind of flagship program. We certainly know that it's got a lot of improvement to do. Got a long way to go. We're trying our best. But we're still learning, and so hopefully in this second round we've improved some, and then the third round hopefully improve more. So thank you for that. I'll go right here back, and then I'll get you.
Darren Miller, resident. My question also piggybacks on the last two questions as well. There was a lot of work that was done, as the council member said, when we came to a vote of the 120 plus people who voted on the 27 projects. I'm now understanding that those 27 projects, or whatever that number is, has now been boiled down to a smaller number. The concern that I have is with the community engagement part of it. You ask us to come and make a vote. We did that, and now that the changes have been made, we've not been called back to the table. I understand there's an advisory team, but it wasn't selected and elected by those people that made that vote. And so I'm concerned. I'm happy to hear that you're going to have community members as part of the overall assessment part of it, but can you give us some hard examples of how you foresee the community being involved in the implementation part of it?
This is an area where if the city wants to speak up, they can. So I want to be clear here about our role. So we're the state, obviously. Our role moving forward is going to be making sure the funds are spent according to our guidelines and according to our criteria set up. We are working with the city to help refine and I think make improvements to the community engagement process, particularly addressing some of the concerns that you've raised. We don't live in Fresno. We're based in Sacramento. We're going to be hiring technical assistance contractors to help to undertake that process. But ultimately, I think the city and their staff are going to be the ones administering the process, responsible for implementation. They're the lead applicant. And so we're the grantee, right? We are the ones who are given the money. We are not the lead applicant. We are not the ones responsible for. Yeah. If they, H, please.
So, Darren, the first part of your question is the number of projects. Has the number of projects changed? There's only been one change in the projects, and that's one of the projects asked to be relieved of their lead role in their project, and that was Tree Fresno. All the other projects have remained the same from that night that we voted for the 125. Has there been some, I think some projects have teamed up, but that hasn't substantially changed the nature of the work or the nature of the budgeting. Yeah, Laura is coming up. In the meantime, your Outreach and Oversight Committee has been meeting on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. And let me just review with you the names of those folks. The Outreach and Oversight Committee has 13 people on it. 3 are from downtown, 3 are from Chinatown, and 7 are from West Fresno. Those people are Pastor Paul Binion, Mary Curry, Monica Diaz, Morgan Doizaki, Sandra Flores, Jim Franklin, B.T. Lewis, Sal Lucatero, Willie Moore, Arthur Moy, Artie Padilla, Margarita Rocha, Craig Sharton, Laura Gloria, and Laura is not on it. She's a staff person, and that's a good segue to Yeah, Darren. So here's, not at this time, and let me tell you, so let me explain to you how that group was chosen. Yeah. So for our folks at CMAC, let me repeat your question. In fact, why don't you ask your question, Darren?
Okay, the question is there an opportunity for the 120 plus people that voted for the 20-something projects to have an election so that we have a representative that's elected by that body and not all appointees as it is configured now?
Sort of yes and no. The appointments were made by the mayor based on a couple of factors. One is that he only chose folks from the folks that had earned the right to vote. So there were. Wait. Well, wait a minute. Maybe I didn't say that properly. There was a community. I must have hit a nerve. Let me explain what I meant to say. There was a community steering committee made up of about 164 people, and when I say earned, what I mean by that is that those folks, and most of you were among those folks. Those folks were either residents who attended 3 out of 5 community meetings, or they worked or had business in the community and they attended 4 out of 5 community meetings. So the mayor took that commitment very seriously. And so the only people that he appointed were from that group of folks. Secondly, yeah.
And never even heard of this selection for this advisory group.
So what the mayor chose to do, they were hand selected. So the yes part of the question, and let me repeat that. The concern for CMAC is that those folks were handpicked. They were handpicked. The mayor handpicked them based on 3 factors. The one I just mentioned, the fact that they were members of the steering committee. Number 2, he wanted to have representation from each of the 3 neighborhoods that were a part of the TCC process. And then number 3, he chose people who he thought had been, that were key spokespeople for each of those 3 neighborhoods. Now, the yes part of Darren's question, is that as people leave that group, the mayor will receive nominations from the Community Engagement Collaborative, which is this group that's gathered here tonight, which includes all the folks who are on the steering committee, plus any other interested community members. Those folks will make nominations for positions as they become available, and then those will be submitted to the mayor for appointment. That's how it works. Yeah, Gary?
It's a bit frustrating because some of us can speak for ourselves. It's like not everyone in the community represents the community. And I think that I was at every meeting from the beginning. I mean, I was there from the dirt being scratched, right? And a lot of us were. But to not have a voice in this, it's almost like, well, we're going to put a panel together that thinks for you, speaks for you, and acts for you. And we're not drones. We speak for ourselves. We have a community that's been desecrated for a long time, and it's about time the community had a way to speak up for itself. We don't need somebody to be appointed for us.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. So the way that the structure has been set up to make sure that people have a voice is that the Outreach and Oversight Committee, which, by the way, the mayor feels is very representative of the community. You may not feel that way. but that the Outreach and Oversight Committee is one body of 13 plus a chairperson. But in addition to that, there's a Community Engagement Collaborative. And the Community Engagement Collaborative is all of y'all and all the 165 plus anybody from the community that wants to show up on a quarterly basis. And during those meetings are open to direct input, just like tonight. In addition to that, the folks that are on this list that are currently on the Outreach and Oversight Committee are available on a regular basis. And by the way, many folks from the community, both those that are involved in projects and those that are just from the community, have utilized the Outreach and Oversight Committee to communicate concerns about projects and ask questions about TCC going forward. So at this point, the sense that there is a sense that this process is working, although until the agreement actually gets signed and projects actually start doing their work, there's not a lot to report on. Yeah, Sylvester.
Thanks. Just give me a moment. I'll be brief, Lisa. Thanks, H. First of all, our organization is responsible for probably about 20 years of work ahead of us that's going to be linked to this process. And you guys have about 40-something million you want to spend in West Fresno. It's going to run out, but our organization is going to keep building for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And this oversight committee that the collaborative is talking about, as I look at the way it was put together, it's ridiculous not to have someone from the organization that's responsible for $300 million worth of work the next 5 years not to be on that oversight committee. As these folks have said, some of the folks you guys on the oversight committee don't speak for all of us. They don't speak for Sylvester. I know him dearly, but they don't speak for me. And they're not going to generate another $300 million over the next 10 years that I have to go out and do, and my organization have to go out and do. So you guys need to reassess how you put the oversight committee together, who's on it. You know, there's no way that no one on that committee has talked to me in 3 or 4 months. I've been working my butt off, talking to people all over the world to get resources brought in. These kind of people need to be on that oversight committee, okay? Reassess it. Thank you.
So let me just also mention one disqualification for being on the oversight committee, and that's folks that have projects. So for instance, none of the folks that have projects, and they're I know. So the first point is that folks that are associated with projects weren't put on the oversight committee because guess what? We want the oversight committee to do oversight. But the other important and significant thing that you said, Sylvester, is that you're making an investment. So you're making a long-term investment, and you're doing a great job at doing community outreach. And guess what? Many people on the Outreach and Oversight Committee are spending their volunteer time to come to your meetings, your community meetings, and listen and take notes and pay attention. At the same time, what's happening is that City College is doing the same thing. Most of the projects that are going on, but City College has had some significant community meetings. At the same time, Fresno Housing Authority is doing significant community meetings. At the same time, the PBID that's being funded in Chinatown has been coming together and is meeting on a regular basis. So I say all that to say this, that there is a ton of activity that's going on. And I know every one of these Outreach and Oversight Committee members, and they aren't going to all of your meetings, and they aren't going to all of George's meetings, and they aren't going to all of the Housing Authority meetings or any of the other meetings that are happening. But they're happening all the time throughout the community. And city staff are there, And so I would just say that we're at a really beautiful and critical time when there is a lot of community engagement going on. And I don't think that after reading this list of leaders, I hope that you'll take the time to engage those folks in meaningful ways. Now, before I go to, I've got Kathy down, and then Lisa, and then Leroy, okay? But before I go to you guys, let Laura respond to the question about projects. What projects have been consolidated? So, Laura?
So if you were here for the first quarterly meeting in January, we actually talked about that. We brought each project up one by one. We had handed out a crosswalk that showed where things got consolidated, what things got moved. Most items got consolidated according to the guidelines. There were lots of items that were very similar in nature that were bunched together in order to be able to run the GHG calculations a little bit easier. For example, a lot of the urban greening projects, the Fanning Ditch Trail, the Broadway Streets, Complete Streets, those all got consolidated. But again, as H mentioned, there was no change in scope or budget. It was really more just to get it to fit into the nice SGC box of the guidelines and make it work nicely. But if you weren't here at that meeting, it was recorded, as well as all the documents are posted online. And we went through, again, project by project, what changed, what didn't change, no change, and so on and so forth. So again, if you want all the information, it's online.
Great, great. And by the way, we have had one resignation from the Outreach and Oversight Committee, and that's a person in downtown. So if you'd like to make a nomination for someone in downtown, then make sure you let myself or Laura know, and we'd be glad to take that name. Now, let me go back to my list here. Kathy.
Thank you. Kathy Omachi, Fresno Chinatown. Was that resignation Craig Sharton? Okay, that is appropriate because he is no longer with the Downtown Association and doesn't really live in the area. Is there a possibility of another position on there that was thinking of retiring from what we've heard in the community? If so, how would that be advertised?
We'll let you know through the, by the way, we have transformfresno.com is active. And it has a lot of this information is on transformfresno.com. Also, we have and many of you, anybody here not get the newsletter, the Transform Fresno newsletter? Okay, well, that's good. And for those of you that didn't get it, we will make sure that you get it next time because we've got your name. Make sure you signed in, and we'll make sure you get that Transform Fresno newsletter. But the website, special designated phone line, and also an email address will be a way for you to get any concerns or questions or thoughts that you have along the way. Lisa?
Since you made me wait forever, I have actually 5 things to say real quick. The first thing, Randall, either the state or the city, it appears, needs to have workshops with the locals to talk about milestone and deliverables, because that's what it sounds like what people need that are getting the money on the ground is a workshop about deliverables and milestones and what is expected of them. That way they can actually plan their work, plan their budgets accordingly. Second, you need to call what I lovingly call the 13 apostles what it is, political appointments, because had there been a process of an application, I would have gladly applied to volunteer to help the West Side. Third, part of the communication plans that was submitted also included things like a newsletter, a more proactive approach to communication to the 126 people that are voting members of the TCC body from Fresno, and I think that would be better than to always refer somebody to a website. You know, my access to the web right now is down because I don't know why, but I've got to figure it out. Also, to let everybody know, there are comment cards out here. Please fill them out. Let them know what your opinions are. Put it in writing.
Thank you. Leroy? then we'll go to.
Leroy Candler, Voice. My question is, once the agreement is signed and agreed upon, will there be a letter awarding the people that has the projects, a written letter saying that your project was awarded, where we'll have an opportunity, we may be able to take this letter to go to private banks or whatever to get some seed money to cover our project for startup?
So yes, we can certainly do that on a case-by-case basis. So we do this for all of our grant programs. If monies have been awarded and for the purposes of obtaining a loan or other source of funding, you need the state to verify that, we can definitely do that. And we approach it on a case-by-case basis because every lender is different and how they like to see that information is different. So yes. Goodness, I mean, we can turn it on very, very fast, especially if through the grantee they can assist with drafting the letter. Then we could, provide edits and then in turn get it out. So usually, we can do 24, 48-hour turnaround if the letter is already prepared.
Randall, I have a question for you. What I want to know is, from everything that you've heard and everything that you've been hearing from this community, I want to know, how is it that you guys going to sit up there and do any kind of agreement with the city of Fresno? Because they're not following the little guidelines that you guys have. Not only that, what I want to know from you is, seeing as how Southwest Fresno was the one that was granted this money, how it is that they take and say that they're going to start from downtown, and within 5 miles of downtown, this is where they're going to do the project. Why it didn't start in Southwest Fresno. And not only that, the next thing I want to ask you is, I don't see how you guys can sign any agreement with the city of Fresno when you got the mayor with his finger in it, people that's going to agree with him on what he wants and what he wants to see done, and not the community. We do not have a say-so. So you need to understand that. Everybody here is telling you, we don't have a say-so. That's one of your requirements. These are federal dollars that you're talking about. It's not just state. These are federal dollars. There are guidelines, and the city of Fresno has not followed them, period. They never have for years. The Inspector General just got through auditing the city of Fresno for fundings. They impediment states what they've done. So my question to you is, why are you guys even considering signing an agreement? Everything has to be up to par before you sign an agreement. Because signing an agreement and think they're going to do right afterwards, that's not going to work.
So you raised some strong points, and I'll answer them one by one. For maybe the first part of your question, we're at a place where we've went through a competitive process, and we read the applications, all the applications, and the city of Fresno and the members of every single project lead that's getting funding met our guidelines. And so that's why the city of Fresno, all the partners were chosen. But beyond that, taking a step back, is the statute. So from the beginning, this program was aimed at benefiting the most impacted parts of the state, environmentally and socioeconomically. You know this. Everyone here knows this and knows the state's. I'll get to that. And the census tracts as ranked by Cal EnviroScreen. So that was part of the decision as well. And yes, there's high-speed rail as part of the guidelines. I don't want to say it's not. that's part of this administration's priorities. And there are certainly people here and throughout the state that disagree with it. And I'm not to say here, neither there. It's just the way that this administration has chosen to go. So that's why we are where we are at. I'll say this, kind of moving forward in your last two questions. We have not signed the grant agreement yet. We do recognize the history, both in the part of the disparities here in Fresno, past administrations on the part of the city, and we aren't giving the monies out in a lump sum. I mean, it really is going to come down to the strict terms of a legal agreement, and either our conditions are met or they are not, and money does not flow. So it's not the case that no money has been awarded yet, or at least given out the door. Of course, the grant is here, we're at an exciting stage, but every single project has to meet every single requirement for those dollars to flow. And if they do not flow. So I understand your distrust, and the extreme distrust, it sounds like. And I haven't lived here, so I can't speak to it, but I will say that we'll have a legal agreement. That legal agreement will spell out payments, and either those performance criteria will be met or they will not be met. Yeah. Morgan. Yeah. Morgan here, and then we'll go around.
Hi, Morgan Doizaki, Central Fish in Chinatown. I think, I don't know if I heard you correctly, but did you say that there's going to be a round 2 in Fresno? And is there going to be more? Is that what the round 2 you were talking about? Is that
other questions? Is that the only? Okay. There will be a round 2, and hopefully more rounds, but statewide competition. So no particular jurisdiction. Anyone can compete, including Fresno. So a statewide competition, round 2, across the state, and hopefully beyond round 2. Yeah.
One question that Brunette raised was, are there federal dollars involved in this, or are they all state dollars?
So for TCC, it is all state dollars. It is all through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Sorry for not clarifying that earlier, which is all cap and trade.
Very good. Roger.
All right, thank you. My name is Roger Brown, and I know you raised a question earlier about Tree Fresno, and I'm also on the board of the Freedom School of Ag Enrichment Program, and we was basically told or to join with Fresno Tree Fresno, and now that they off, where do we go from here? Now they no longer. So now that kicks us out. So my question is, we need to do something about that, basically, because now we no longer part of the TCC.
Well, Aline, who I think might have left, Aline, who left, Ms. Curry, I'm going to write your name down right here. Is right now in negotiation with us concerning some of the tree planting that will take place, and hopefully the Freedom School will be a part of that project as it is going forward. So I don't know whether you've been in communication with Aline on your team, but she has a proposal in right now that's being considered for tree planting. So let's talk offline about that, Roger, because I want you to be clear about that, and we can talk with Laura Gloria, who's been communicating directly with Aline. You're next.
Okay, I have two questions. One of them is, one is a statement, and the statement is, our mayor appointed people, but nobody can get an appointment to meet with him. And I don't know how many people have tried, but we don't meet with him. So how is he going to be able to determine who's best suited when he refuses to meet with his constituents? And the other thing is, I'm like Roger and Aline, when she left, she was saying that basically they were out because Tree Fresno dropped out because they weren't willing to assume them, and then they dropped out. So she left here saying that they're not in. She didn't say she was in negotiations with anybody else.
Okay, so yeah, we've met with Aline, we've met with Roger, and we continue to correspond with Aline right now. So that's all I can say. We are in correspondence with Aline about going forward on a tree planting project for Freedom School. Grecia, we've got time for about 5 more questions.
I'm sorry, do you have Mrs. Curry down? Mrs. Curry's down. Okay. Oh, just making sure she's. Oh. So my question, I'm not sure if it's directed towards Randall. Thank you for being here, first of all, or the city. But in the council awarding the city the funds, there were 3 conditions that the staff recommended, which the council adopted. One was to improve the community engagement plan, to improve the displacement avoidance plan, and the workforce development plan. So on those 3 aspects, how has the city or SGC moved on these, and is there going to be an opportunity for folks to be involved in those processes? Because during the whole TCC process, we kept hearing time and time again about, I don't want to be kicked out of my community because we're getting tens of millions of dollars put into here. And I want to ensure that the jobs that are being brought because of these dollars that are going to my neighbor, my cousins, so forth. So how are those 3 conditions moving?
So a very good question. And this gets back to the heart of the structure of the administration of this grant, including the outreach and steering committee, the composition of the committees, et cetera. SGC is currently providing, as part of the overall grant agreement, assistance in terms with the city to refine each of those processes. So we're doing what we spelled out to council. I do believe we are going to outline that there will be a chance for public input into what's proposed. Again, this is going to be kind of subject to the terms of the grant agreement. So yes, each of those areas are being further refined and will be further refined and finalized before the grant agreement is signed.
Okay, we're down to our last 4 questions. We have Mrs. Curry, Blong, Matthew, and then my sister here, Sheila. Shanice. Okay.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Winston for being here and trying to answer all of our questions. One of the things that I know has been put to rest is that 1 mile, 5 mile radius. That's been gone for a long time. So we're not dealing with that particular thing anymore. What I would like to know tonight is, where are we? What are the next steps? And when do we find some resolution so we can get started on projects? And the other thing I'd like to say is that when I was put on the committee, one of the first things I spoke to the city about was, we will not be held accountable if the state says your project doesn't meet. The city people, the committee, will not be held accountable for that, because we are not responsible for how you put your plan together. And so don't blame the local people, because we're there fighting for everybody's project. So I want you to understand that. No, I don't speak for everybody in Fresno, and I don't try to, but I try to speak for the best of us that we can do, for all of us.
So thank you for that. Now, in the first part of the meeting, I spelled out a little bit in terms of next steps, and I'll outline it again, but also share some thoughts on. This has been really helpful, just hearing kind of input into things that we need to make sure are kind of improved as we move forward. So the holdup on implementing the projects is definitely on SGC's end. The grant agreement is incredibly complex, involving all the projects and the need to spell out how we're going to be paying for every component of every project that meets our readiness requirements. All that needs to be put in legal language, and then we have to kind of crosswalk that with the grants that we're awarding in Ontario and in Watts. So that's taking a long time, longer than expected, I would say. By July is when we anticipate having that wrap up. I will say though here, and this is just listening to everyone in this room, and hearing obviously some of the concerns that the way in which this overall process is structured, and the communication between the parties, the city, SGC, is critical. And there's room, I think, for some improvement on that front. If there's not communication happening, there's a vacuum. Misinformation can flow. People think one thing or another thing, and that's not helpful for anyone. So I think what we're going to do, SGC, and I think what I can commit to do is making sure that we're looping back with the city and our other partners to refine that communication process, and I think bringing additional resources to bear, as in people on the ground here that we're going to pay for, will help that. Because thank you. Because clearly there's thank you, Sebastian. Communication will be helpful. So I hope that answers your question to some extent. It has been a long and arduous process, but we hope that come July, once the grant agreement is finalized, then we'll proceed with implementation of every one of the projects.
Thank you. Longley with Food Commons. I'm just wondering, because there's delayed funding agreements, that's going to affect our readiness timeline, because we're a project that involves site development and we have to go through the entitlement process. Any delay for us is very critical. So I'm wondering if there's any intention to extend your readiness deadline because there's been delay in funding. We don't want to go out and spend the money without assurance that there's going to be reimbursement.
That's a really good question, and I apologize for not addressing it earlier about extension of our readiness deadline given our own tardiness. And yes, we are going to extend that basically as soon as we're ready to finalize the agreement, and that's when the timeline will begin. So we want to be able to accommodate those timelines when really it is ourselves who are causing the delay. And if there is a need to, and we've done this with other projects, for purposes with regard to lending or otherwise from other institutions that are dependent upon the funding through TCC, the state or SGC is going to be willing to step in to provide those assurances if need be. And this gets kind of to the earlier question about being able to provide a letter of support.
Second to the last question.
Just real quick, are we sending those drafted letters for the support and lending and funding and whatnot? Are we sending those directly to you, or where would you like us to send those to?
Yes. So it's important that the grant agreement be finalized first. I will say that. Unless if there's extraordinary circumstances where funding is going to lapse, then we can talk about it. But the grant agreement being completed is critical, because that lays out the terms and the conditions of how you would get the funds to begin with. That being said, there's a TCC, or will be a TCC contact person here on the ground. You can certainly contact myself, and I'll give you my card afterwards, and I'll direct you accordingly. It's a little bit hard to say now because we haven't finalized the grant agreement, and so a lender is going to want to know, well, what are the terms of the funding? What's being funded? And we can't answer that until the grant agreement is finalized. I think was it Tate? Yeah.
Last one. Shalice.
Hi, concerned and frustrated resident of West Fresno. I would just like to know why, out of the 125 who came to all of these meetings, were we not able to vote and appoint who we wanted to sit on this committee to represent us? Because one of the guys, the appointees, was at our community meeting. He came. He's here tonight. I'm not going to put him on blast, but every question we asked him, he was told that he could not answer from the city. He gave us no answers to any of the questions that we were asking. And that's why we're upset that the community, the ones that we want in there, they're not being in there and we're not being heard. So he's appointed, but yet when the community comes to him with questions to be answered, basically he told us that he was told by the city that he could not answer.
So, Shalice, that falls to me to answer that question. The mayor is not apologetic in who he appointed. The mayor believes in the people. I understand, but the question that you asked is why they weren't elected. And that's because the mayor chose, rather than having the 164 people elect appointees to an outreach and oversight committee, he chose to appoint them. That's why. Well, he has the authority to do that. And I explained to you how he made his choice. And I need to say to everybody in the room today that the mayor did not choose people who were yes people. The last scenario that was chosen, you recall there were 4 scenarios that bubbled up through the community process that the city facilitated. 4. The last scenario was crafted by people from the community. That's number 5. And it was voted on 125 to 1. And the people who were the main folks that were responsible for crafting that 5th scenario are on this committee. They didn't agree with the city process, and they stood up to it, and they crafted another scenario. So the mayor's pretty happy, and actually is very grateful to the people who have subjected themselves to sit on this Outreach and Oversight Committee. And he is going to be receiving nominations from all of you all to fill different spots as they come up, with the understanding that he wants to keep a balance with 3 folks in Chinatown, 3 folks in downtown, and 7 folks in West Fresno. Now, we've come to the end of our official time here, and so I'm going to close this time out. Randall has agreed to stay around for a little while for Sylvesta and Brunette and anybody else that wants to ask any questions. If you'd like to ask any questions of me as a representative from the mayor's office, or Laura as a representative from the city manager's office, we'd be glad to do that.